One of the biggest failures that consulting firms experience when it comes to project management is failure to hold their project managers accountable. This is a huge problem, and I would say it happens in most firms. At the Engineering Management Institute, we've helped so many firms at this point build custom project management development programs that we've come up with some great ways that you can hold your PMs accountable. So in this episode, I'm going to give you 3 steps that you can walk through to ensure that you're holding your project managers accountable. Let's jump right in. Why is holding project managers accountable important in your organization? So the reason that holding project managers accountable is so important is because your project managers are really the cash flow engine of your firm, right? They dictate how profitable your projects are. So if they're not performing at a high level, then the ship, so to speak, may be sinking, right, in terms of your company financially. And unfortunately, oftentimes what will happen is if your PMs aren't being held accountable and their projects aren't doing well financially, they'll probably just do well enough that you won't notice it fast enough to solve the problem, and you'll end up losing a lot of money, right? And that's why I'm saying the ship is sinking slowly, right? So it's really important that your project managers be held accountable and that they be held accountable on a very regular basis. So what I want to do here is I'm going to give you 3 specific steps that you can take to hold your project managers accountable. And we've learned these because at the Engineering Management Institute, one of the main services we provide is building custom project management training, or we like to call them development programs for consulting firms. And so in doing so many of these, most firms just don't hold PMs accountable. So we try to integrate it into the process that we build. And so I'm going to give you 3 steps for holding your project managers accountable. Step 1, set clear expectations. You must make it extremely clear from the very beginning of their tenure as a project manager what you expect from that person as a project manager. And really, you should do this, generally speaking, from a company-wide perspective. Make it clear as to what you expect from your project managers across the company. In firms typically that have good project management guidelines or manuals or procedures, they typically have clear expectations. In fact, when we conduct project management training for firms, especially when we're building a custom program, we typically dedicate most of the first session of the training, especially if it's a fundamentals course, to covering the expectations of project managers, both industry-wide and within that firm. It's just that important that it deserves attention. Now, the other thing that you should do in this first step is not to just define the expectations of project managers, which of course is going to be, manage projects to the scope, to the schedule, to the budget, but you also need to let them know how you're going to measure whether or not they're meeting those expectations, right? Because you can tell someone, hey, I expect this from you, right? But you may have no way of measuring it unless you've thought that through. So you want to be clear about that. For example, you might say, hey, I'm expecting a report with all of your budgets once a month that I can take a look at to make sure you're on course. Or I'm asking you to get client feedback once a quarter and share that client feedback with me. Right? So come up with some metrics or measurements that you can use to hold your PMs accountable and communicate to them, again, what you're measuring them on, right? Because it's not really fair to measure someone on something unless they know that they're being measured on it, right? And that's a really critical component of setting clear expectations. All right, step number 2, monitor your project managers consistently on a very regular basis. So how do you monitor your project managers? Now, first of all, let me say this about overseeing any leadership or management position, right? It's a really tricky thing because there has to be a really good balance between managing people and micromanaging people, right? Or just letting them go off on their own and just standing over their shoulder. There's got to be a balance between them. You want to be able to tell your PMs, I trust you, go and lead your projects, lead your teams, and I'll be here to support you. However, at the same time, when you're giving someone projects like we have in the AEC industry, and especially a new PM, and they're managing projects that are millions of dollars in budget, you certainly don't want them to just go off on a tangent, especially when they're new and they just don't know what they're doing yet, right? They need that mentoring and they need that guidance. All right. So It's very important that you're monitoring them on a regular basis. You set the expectations in step one. Now you need to monitor or measure them against those expectations. So hopefully they're submitting the reports to you that I talked about earlier and you're able to look at them. But are there other things that you can do to monitor them? Whether it is looking at their financials, whether it's huddling with their teams and ask them, how are they doing? Are you happy with their project management skills? Maybe you've turned them over to a client and they're now managing a client that you used to manage. You might have a good enough relationship with that client just to check in with the client and call them up and say, hey, how's it going? I made Anthony a new project manager. Is he really meeting your needs, right? You have to try to keep an eye on them so that you know where and when to mentor them and provide them with guidance, because it's no use in setting expectations in step one and telling them you're going to measure what they're doing and then not measuring or monitoring it, because then you're not doing what you said you were going to do. All right. Step number 3, meet regularly with your project managers to discuss both the good and the bad of what you've observed. All right. So step 1, you set the expectations. You said you were going to measure them. Step 2, you did measure or monitor their progress. Now, step 3, you need to get together with them and let them know how they're doing. One of my favorite books of all time is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And one of the things that Dale Carnegie says in the book is that when people are praised, they tend to get motivated and excited and they want to do more of what they did well, right? So it's important to praise them and let them know, hey, your projects did great this quarter, or I got great feedback from the client. You're doing a great job. That's going to get people fired up and keep them growing as project managers. Now, on the flip side, we also have to talk to them about what's gone wrong. Maybe their projects are over budget. They're losing money. Maybe a client gave some negative feedback, right? So you do have to address the negative with them too, but you should do it in a way so that they understand that you're telling them about it so that they can improve it and it doesn't happen again. And the thing that we have to think about here is that, and it's something we do very poorly in the AE industry, is that your project managers, they want feedback on their performance. They want to know how they're doing. What we do in the AE industry, though, typically is once a year, we do an annual performance review. We fill out some silly form. We sit down with people for a half an hour, and then we talk to them about their performance again in a year. And that just doesn't cut it. All right. So let me recap those 3 steps for you. You're going to set very clear expectations for them at the beginning of their tenure as a project manager and let them know how you're going to measure those expectations. You're going to monitor them on a regular basis, whether it's monitoring some of those metrics, client feedback, talking to their team members. And then lastly, you're going to meet with them, kind of debrief with them on a regular basis. I recommend at a minimum quarterly, if not monthly, and let them know how things are going from your perspective, both the good and the bad. And they will be very happy for your feedback, and let them know you're doing these debrief sessions so that they can ask you questions, seek guidance, and they can continue to grow. Now, before we wrap up here, I want to talk about how you can sustain this process. Because even if you have the best 3-step process in the world for holding your PMs accountable, if you don't do it regularly or if you can't sustain it long-term, it's not going to help you, right? It's like anything else in your career or in life. Hey, I want to become healthier, so I'm going to go to the gym. Well, if you go to the gym once a week or twice a week or whenever you can, it's not going to work out, right? You've got to do it consistently. So to do these things consistently and hold your PMs accountable, I highly recommend having a solid project management learning and development program or process or guidelines, right? And really, the firms that we work with, either we build them for them or we help them ramp up or kind of fix up their old PM practices. It changes the game for them, and you have to do it. And you don't have to hire a firm like EMI. You can do it yourself potentially. However, the one thing that I will tell you is it has to be delivered and maintained on a consistent basis. And I say that because most firms that call us for project management training or learning and development, they say to us, we have a great program, but we haven't been able to do it because our project managers that typically deliver it are too busy. Well, I got news for you. If you're not doing it, then you don't have a great program. You don't have any program. And your people are sitting there, their projects are failing, and you're not giving them the guidance, support, training that they need. So please establish some kind of a program, whether you do it internally or you get some help on it, and give it consistently. And if it makes sense, hire someone to deliver it so that when your PMs get busy, the program doesn't get shelved, because project management training is the one area that can really increase the profitability of your firm, because theoretically, if your project managers are upskilled, then their projects will be more profitable. All right. So let's just, again, quick recap. Step number 1, you want to let them know what their expectations are as a project manager. and how you're going to measure them. Step number 2, monitor them on a regular basis. And step number 3, meet with them as often as you can to give them feedback, both the good and the bad. I hope you enjoyed the video today. This is a critical problem in project management, not holding PMs accountable, and I hope that you can utilize some of these steps to make sure that it doesn't happen in your firm. Please consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineering professionals become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.